welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. My name is Peggy Tsai with Big ID, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Wendy Batchelder, Senior Vice President of Global Data Governance and Chief Data Officer of Trust at Salesforce. Welcome, Wendy.
Thanks for having me, Peggy. It's so nice to be here with you this morning.
Pleasure is mine indeed. So March is International Women's Month, and according to CDO Magazine, a fair number of their chief data officer base are women. So while the percentage of women CDOs are increasing over the years, what else needs to happen to get more women to the C-suite? Is it more mentoring, support, sponsorship, skill set? What are your thoughts on that, Wendy?
I think, yes, it's all of those things. So I think it is interesting that there are more women in data than there were before. And I'm not sure if that's a sheer count or it's just we're maybe shining a light on it. I mean, if you look at some of the statistics out of the World Economic Forum, it's something like 237 years before we'll see true gender equality in the workplace. And personally, reading some of that's just so unacceptable to me. I really think we need to do a lot more. And what I hear in a kind of the day-to-day basis is, especially come like promotion times, not necessarily in one company or another, but just talking to folks across industries, across companies is, the comments are made like, well, we didn't have any women in our promotion cycle because none of them are really ready. And, we hope that they'll be ready next year. And it really makes me cringe. If you don't have enough women who are qualified for a promotion, I think that's our fault, right? What are we doing to qualify them to be promotable and not just waiting for women to suddenly be ready? I mean, it's your job as a manager to develop your people. Why are you not taking accountability for the fact that you didn't do that this year? Or the year before. And so now you have this pipeline of talent that is largely underrepresented of women. I've seen this in data in teams across industries in that your lower levels have really good gender equality. And maybe you have that on your leadership team. You're thinking like, oh, not me, like mine's 50-50 or it's 60-40 and I feel really good about that. Look at your middle management data. Everyone I've talked to is like, oh, yeah, that's not great. And it's because I think we're not promoting women fast enough early in their careers. We're looking at the criteria and I think the criteria sometimes maybe is biased. I think sometimes we are, if you listen to the language, we have a lot of unconscious bias perhaps in like, oh, well, he will grow into that or he can stretch. And then you talk about a female, oh, she's not quite ready. Well, why is that? Why can't she stretch? Or you're just really challenging that. So I think there's a couple things that we can all do. One, we absolutely need to be mentoring up and down and also reverse mentoring. I think it's important for you to have a mentor that is far more junior than you so that you can be listening to what's the perception, what the feelings are on the ground floor. If you don't have a reverse mentor, go get one. And then also just making sure that you are sponsoring other women because it's our job to make sure that they're ready when it comes time for promoting. And if there are skill set gaps, then help them to connect those. If there are, I would say, common skills or core skills, often referred to as soft skills, communication, strategic thinking, leadership, go give them that, give those opportunities and be intentional about it. But don't just do it theoretically, build an actual plan. And so I do think that is all of our jobs to make sure that we are lifting up the next generation of female talent and not just waiting for that to just kind of magically happen organically, because clearly that's not working, or it wouldn't be another 237 years before we see gender equality. So we have to do more.
Definitely agree with that. So the theme, as you mentioned about bias for International Women's Day is #BreakTheBias. This is a very applicable theme, especially given a lot of the gender bias that AI algorithms have, for example, for screening resumes for candidates, as an example. So, what ways do you think that perhaps better data governance can help reduce the bias for training data that's used in algorithms today?
I think that's a really interesting question, and that I hope at this point, acknowledging that bias in data exists. If you're using historical data and historically there's been bias, your data is biased. And I think that sometimes we forget that. And so I think acknowledging that that exists is a huge step in and of itself. But I think looking at the training data that you're using, really getting a governance expert in there to take a look at it and make sure that the data you're using is not biased. And what do you need to do to that data set to make sure that you're not training bad behavior into your algorithm is hugely important. I think we probably all heard the example that you cited around, hiring, where we use some hiring algorithms to predict the right candidate, and it always predicts the white man, because historically that's what had been hired in that role. And so I think that's a fantastic and easy to understand example of why it's important to look at the underlying data set and make sure that we're not teaching bad behaviors. Just because we're automating something doesn't mean that it's always going to be right, because it's especially for unmonitored AI algorithms where we're setting it and forgetting it, maybe coming back to check on it in a year. What's the risk there? And really assessing that. So looking at the data, making sure that it is a complete representation. I think really doing some strong A/B testing, making sure that you're getting the results that you expect to get, and just making sure that you're not letting it run rogue is also important. But I think just having a data governance professional look at the quality of the data set. Is it, a fair representation of the population? Is there anything that we need to change to make sure that that data set is appropriate for use? Is really important, before we just go build something and let it run wild.
Wendy, can you share with us who your most influential mentors or sponsors were in your career? And what lessons did they teach you that help shape your leadership style today?
Yes, absolutely. There's three people that come to mind. One of which is really I credit to the reason I'm in data today. Her name is Laura Patnode. She was my really a stakeholder for me early in my career, and asked me to take on a data role, and I felt really unqualified for it. But she helped me understand that some of the skills that I had that were not necessarily understanding the nuances of metadata or really understanding the power of data governance were not necessarily the reasons why she thought of me for a data leadership role, but more around understanding my aptitude to learn and to explore things and look at things objectively and be able to take complex situations and translate them into more simplistic terms that were understandable for others. And that really gave me a lot of confidence in myself, because I think until that point, I always felt like I needed to be the expert and to really understand things, from top to bottom in detail and be very technical. And that she really gave me the empowerment to know that sometimes you can just ask really good questions, and that's good leadership. You don't have to have all the technical knowledge across. And of course, I think as you move up in your career, of course, you're not going to know everything technically, but it was a pivot point for me, and it built a lot of self-confidence for me along the way. Stephen Harris and Charles Thomas are two other mentors and truly sponsors, I would say, who also breathed a lot of confidence into me and helping me understand what my strengths were at a time when I was always the youngest person in the room, and was very aware of that because a lot of times I was also the only female in the room. And so a lot of times that had a very heavy burden, and just understanding that, I had every right to be there. And, there's a reason why I was the youngest person in the room, or there was a reason why, that was that was the case, and just helping me to feel like I belonged, and that I was able to influence in a way that was different and was unique, and just helping me understand that my leadership style was unique in those circumstances, and that's why I was there. I often come into situations with a degree of curiosity and just seeking to understand, and I always try to maintain a humble posture of, because I know I'm always going to be learning, and I'm never going to be the expert in everything. And so just coming in curious and being willing to ask really simple questions, which sometimes I think we're afraid to do, especially in leadership roles. And so that's something that they taught me, and something that I carry forward to me in practice to this day. So thank you to all my mentors and sponsors. There's several more that I could, reference, but those three always stand out to me because they've really shaped who I am.
Great. And lastly, what words of advice would you give to female data professionals for International Women's Day?
So beyond the campaign to break the bias, I think that is great and important. But I think there's so much more that we need to do beyond just telling our stories. Our stories are very powerful. Please don't get me wrong, but we also need to push, I think, a great deal harder than we are for equality in this space. And so I think if you're a female in the data profession, you're in the minority. We all are. We know that. So how do you bring others with you? Who are you bringing into rooms? Who's not represented? What opinions or opportunities are we missing out on because they're not in the room with us? So go get them. Like if you're in a meeting and you're the only female, or you're in the minority, which is most meetings, is there someone else you could bring along? And maybe their expertise is not perfectly applicable to the topic. So bring them as an observer, bring them into the conversation and encourage them to speak up, and question yourself. Are you speaking up? Are you setting the example? Are you offering a suggestion? Are you asking a question? But really bringing others with us. That is the best way to grow the pie, is to bring others along with us and help them. So if you're not mentoring, you need to be. If you're not being mentored, you need to be. If you're not helping others to learn, you need to be. And it's extra for us. And I think that's the only way it's going to get better, is by taking that on. And so I just really encourage you to make sure that you are paving a path for those behind you, and that we're really always keeping in mind that a rising tide lifts all the ships. There's not a scarcity here, right? There is a dramatic under availability of data professionals. So bringing 1 or 100 female leaders with you, it's just going to help our pie be bigger and more diverse, and help break the bias that we experience in the data space. So I just really encourage you to bring others along with you.
Thank you, Wendy, so much for joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.
Thank you, Peggy.